What if I told you that the most dangerous person in any room isn't the one shouting the loudest, but the quiet observer in the corner, the one who's been underestimated, misunderstood, and pushed too far? Stay with me, because what Dr. Ramani discovered about human psychology will completely transform how you see empaths forever. Dr. Ramani said that every individual carries within them both light and shadow, the dual nature of being human. Nowhere is this paradox more visible than in the empath, often mislabeled as fragile or naive, when in reality they are among the most psychologically resilient and self-aware individuals walking this earth. Most people mistake empathy for weakness, but Dr. Ramani's insights revealed something infinitely more complex and, frankly, far more formidable. You see, the human psyche operates on multiple interconnected levels. There's the persona, our social mask, which conceals the deeper truths of who we are. But what happens when someone with extraordinary emotional perception finally removes that mask? What Dr. Ramani revealed about the shadow self will truly change how you view emotional strength. Empaths live in what she called the tension of opposites. They feel deeply, yet they've learned to contain that emotional depth with poise. They can see through deception and manipulation, yet they continue to believe in humanity's potential for redemption. This isn't weakness or denial. It's what Dr. Ramani termed the transcendent function, the ability to hold two opposing truths without losing one's equilibrium. This duality is precisely what makes them both compassionate and dangerous. And here's why those with narcissistic tendencies should be deeply wary. Dr. Ramani said that the most integrated individuals are those who have confronted their own shadow and come out whole. Empaths, through repeated betrayal, gaslighting, and emotional exploitation, are forced into this process of self-confrontation much earlier and more intensely than most. They don't just know love, they know the absence of it. They've walked through the dark corridors of human cruelty and emotional neglect. So when you look into the eyes of a true empath, you're not seeing fragility. You're looking at someone who has already survived psychological warfare and emerged wiser, sharper, and infinitely more powerful. The narcissist, blinded by arrogance, mistakes compassion for compliance and makes a fatal miscalculation. They think they're dealing with someone who can be molded, controlled, or emotionally drained at will. But Dr. Ramani found that those who lead with their hearts often possess the strongest psychological foundations. Why? Because they've had to construct those foundations from the rubble of betrayal. Every disappointment, every manipulation, every heartbreak becomes data, stored, analyzed, and integrated into a deeper understanding of human behavior. Listen carefully to what happens next, because this is where the dynamic shifts entirely. According to Dr. Ramani's theory of individuation, every person must eventually confront their authentic self, the version of them that exists beneath roles, masks, and defenses. For most people, this confrontation happens gradually, if ever. But for empaths who have been betrayed, this process accelerates dramatically. Pain becomes a catalyst for transformation, igniting what Dr. Ramani referred to as psychological rebirth. Emotional sensitivity, far from being a flaw, becomes advanced emotional pattern recognition, the ability to decode, interpret, and internalize complex emotional data. Empaths don't just sense emotions, they read them like maps of human intent. Every wound, every slight, every deception is recorded, not for vengeance, but for understanding. And when that accumulated understanding reaches critical mass, something extraordinary happens. That's when you witness what Dr. Ramani described as the emergence of the self, an awakening that cannot be undone. The most profound transformations, she said, do not happen in moments of comfort, but through crisis. She called this principle enantiodromia, the process by which things pushed to their extremes transform into their opposite. The empath who was endlessly patient becomes unmovable. The one who always forgave becomes final. The one who gave everything without question begins to choose with precision. This transformation isn't about coldness or cruelty, it's about wholeness. Dr. Ramani understood that true strength comes not from denying one's darker instincts, but from integrating them consciously. When an empath integrates their shadow, something shifts irreversibly. They stop seeking approval, they stop over-explaining, they realize that peace isn't found in fixing others, but in mastering themselves. Dr. Ramani distinguished between those who are unconsciously reactive and those who are consciously responsive. Most people act out of their wounds, lashing out or seeking revenge, but the transformed empath, they move differently. They don't destroy their betrayer, they outgrow them. They've already won a far more significant battle, the one within themselves. As Dr. Ramani said, the greatest victory isn't conquering others, but mastering the parts of yourself that would drag you down to their level. Here's where the narcissist's downfall becomes inevitable. Manipulators rely on predictable emotional reactions. They need you to chase, to explain, to defend. But once the empath reaches psychological autonomy, they become immune to these traps. They don't play the game anymore. Detachment born from understanding is the most powerful position one can hold. The awakened empath doesn't retreat because they are wounded. They step back because they finally see with clarity. That detachment isn't apathy, it's liberation. It's the peace that comes from no longer needing to prove anything to anyone. According to Dr. Ramani's research on psychological types, empaths possess what she referred to as feeling function dominance. This doesn't mean they're irrational or overly emotional. On the contrary, it represents an advanced form of emotional intelligence. They detect inconsistencies before they're spoken. They perceive dissonance between words and energy, truth and performance. And when this ability merges with experience and discernment, something unprecedented forms. The empath stops operating from pain and begins to operate from power. They no longer react impulsively. They respond with intention. Dr. Ramani called this state the transcendent function, the rare capacity to hold conflicting realities without fracturing. The empath who has been through betrayal doesn't just survive it, they transcend it, emerging as an individuated being, whole, self-sustaining, and unshakable. They no longer chase validation or bend for acceptance. They trust their intuition, honor their boundaries, and guard their peace like sacred ground. And here's the part that truly redefines power. Dr. Ramani identified something called psychological mirroring. Empaths naturally reflect back the energy that others project onto them, but once they awaken, that mirror becomes truth itself. They no longer absorb dysfunction, they expose it. They don't attack, they illuminate. In the presence of an awakened empath, deception simply cannot survive. Truth becomes their quiet weapon, and it dismantles manipulation without a single raised voice. What follows is the return of the repressed, a psychological eruption of all the suppressed strength, clarity, and conviction that the empath once hid to keep the peace. When they reclaim this power, they stop negotiating their worth. They stop arguing with the deluded. They stop trying to fix what was never their responsibility. They simply decide, act, and walk away. This is individuation in motion, the living embodiment of balance between heart and shadow. Dr. Ramani taught that the shadow doesn't only contain our darkness, but our unlived potential. For empaths, that shadow holds their capacity for self-protection, assertiveness, and detachment, qualities they were often taught to suppress. Betrayal forces them to integrate those disowned strengths, forging a self that is both kind and unyielding. This integration doesn't make them cold, it makes them discerning. They continue to care, but now their empathy has boundaries. They know that their compassion is sacred, not a resource to be squandered on those who exploit it. And from this integration emerges what Dr. Ramani called the individuated self, a being who no longer seeks completion from anyone else. The empath becomes whole within, both tender and untouchable. Dr. Ramani said that the most powerful individuals are not those who act from their wounds, but those who have transformed their pain into wisdom. The awakened empath embodies this truth completely. They have seen the depths of human cruelty and risen above it. They recognize manipulation instantly, not from fear, but from experience. They have learned to see truth without losing faith, to set boundaries without guilt, and to walk away without bitterness. What happens next is pure psychological evolution. The empath who once questioned their worth becomes the mirror that exposes falseness in others. They no longer need revenge because they understand that life itself delivers balance. They no longer chase closure because they have already found it within. And they no longer fear losing anyone because they've discovered the one person they can never lose, themselves. Dr. Ramani showed us that individuation is not the end of empathy. It is its highest form, empathy guided by wisdom, compassion tempered by discernment, and love rooted in truth. The awakened empath doesn't just survive the darkness, they become the light that exposes it. They reach what Dr. Ramani called psychological sovereignty, complete ownership of their inner and emotional world. But the final transformation, this is what Dr. Ramani described as the return to the self, and it is absolutely magnificent. Dr. Ramani discovered that genuine strength isn't the absence of sensitivity, it's sensitivity refined by awareness and wisdom. The fully awakened empath embodies this paradox in its purest form. They feel profoundly but love with discernment. They understand deeply yet choose their engagements with care. They forgive sincerely, but they never forget the lessons that pain has taught them. Dr. Ramani explained that the most integrated individuals are those capable of holding both their light and their shadow in conscious awareness, without repression or denial. The transformed empath has mastered the art of balance. They are gentle with those who deserve their softness, yet firm and immovable with those who demand boundaries. They've developed what Dr. Ramani referred to as the art of appropriate response, an ability to meet every situation with clarity rather than reaction. And here's the final insight that makes them utterly untouchable. According to Dr. Ramani, the highest form of psychological evolution is when a person no longer relies on others to feel complete. The awakened empath attains this state not through isolation or bitterness, but through integration and self-realization. They become whole, not by retreating from the world, but by choosing their place within it with intention and precision. They no longer feel compelled to rescue people who have no desire to be saved. They no longer chase after those who consistently flee from authenticity. They no longer waste their sacred light on emotional voids disguised as people. Instead, they've learned what Dr. Ramani called the art of conscious connection, engaging only in relationships where mutual respect, reciprocity, and emotional truth exist. The end result of this transformation is something Dr. Ramani described as the individuated empath, and they are, without exaggeration, one of the most powerful psychological forces you can encounter. Dr. Ramani said that when an individual integrates their shadow, faces their fears, and emerges whole, they become what she termed a force of nature. Not destructive, but unstoppable. Not aggressive, but deeply grounded and absolutely certain of their worth. The awakened empath doesn't seek revenge because they've transcended the need for validation through retribution. They don't have to prove their value to anyone because they know it intrinsically, in the marrow of their being. They no longer fear solitude because they've learned to be extraordinary company for themselves. Their peace is self-sustaining. Their calm, unshakable. They become what Dr. Ramani referred to as psychologically complete. Individuals who have transformed their deepest wounds into profound sources of strength. They are powerful not because they fight harder, but because they cannot be manipulated, coerced, or broken again. And that, according to Dr. Ramani's lifetime of research and clinical insight, is the most terrifying reality a narcissist or manipulator can face. Someone who has learned to love themselves with the same intensity, devotion, and compassion they once offered to everyone else. The empath's journey from victimhood to sovereignty is not merely a story of personal recovery. It is, in every sense, what Dr. Ramani described as the hero's journey of the psyche. They descend into darkness, confront their hidden pain, integrate their power, and rise again, not simply healed, but profoundly transformed. Dr. Ramani discovered that suffering, when consciously embraced and psychologically processed, becomes the raw material for wisdom and spiritual depth. The empath who has walked through the fires of betrayal, heartbreak, and emotional turmoil does not merely survive those experiences, they become illuminated by them. They transform their suffering into insight, their pain into empathy, and their wounds into wisdom that others can draw strength from. They become the living embodiment of Dr. Ramani's most powerful observation, that within every wound lies the seed of transcendence, and within every betrayal lies an invitation to become more authentic, more powerful, and more whole than ever before. This is the psychology of the awakened empath, a being who has learned that love without boundaries leads to self-destruction, and that compassion paired with discernment leads to liberation. Once you understand this, you will never again underestimate the quiet strength of someone who has turned their pain into power, their heartbreak into insight, and their suffering into the foundation of an unbreakable soul.